The 80 Years' War, also known as the Dutch Revolt or the Dutch Wars of Religion. The first thing to note that I want to do while we're on this picture is that the Dutch Wars of Religion are not just Dutch. They were, in effect, a kind of world war, as you can see right here in this picture that kind of represents the Dutch Wars of Religion. The milk cow, this particular picture, the milch cow is another way to pronounce it, probably the right way. But this is the milch cow right here, which kind of represents these wars. I'll just start out by saying that, describing this picture. What you see here is the provinces in the Netherlands represented by this cow. But as you can see, every country is involved. First of all, there's the Dutch. The Dutch, who have a kind of republican idea of government, they're trying to control the cow by holding its horns. So the Dutch, of course, are involved with their own cow. However, everybody's trying to get in on this war. First, you have England. Here is England in the person of Queen Elizabeth I feeding the cow. She's basically giving the support. Here is Spain in the person of King Philip II trying to control the cow. Here is France, who this right here actually is Duke Hercule Francois, the fourth brother of the Valois that we saw, the one that I told you died. He was sent to try to get something out of these Dutch Wars of Religion. Eventually, as you see, he's getting pooped on by this cow because things did not go well for France in this war, even though they tried to get something out of it. And then down here you have William the Silent of Orange, who becomes the Dutch stadtholder after the war, and basically, even though he's Dutch, he gets a lot of this war as well for his own personal gain. You can see that in the actual lines of the poem. Not long time since I saw a cow did Flanders represent, upon whose back King Philip rode, as being malcontent. The Queen of England giving hay, whereon the cow did feed, as one that was her greatest help in her distress and need. The Prince of Orange milked the cow, and made his purse the pail. The cow did shit in Monsieur's hand, while he did hold her tail. So you get the idea, it's a kind of world war, because everybody wants the Dutch Republic for reasons we'll see in a second. Now, to understand these Dutch wars of religion, we should go back to Charles V. You see him right here, someone that a lot of European politics is always going to go back to. Charles V inherited all these lands just as his birthright. You'll recall that he had also the Holy Roman Empire eventually, so he also kind of has this big territory in Central Europe. But we're not even counting that right now. These are just the lands of his birthright through his four grandparents. From Ferdinand of Aragon, he has the Aragonese lands, which is the great Mediterranean power of the late Middle Ages, mainly because of their absorption of Barcelona, Catalonia, which is a great sea power, and so they've also got these islands. From his grandmother Isabella of Castile, he has, of course, Castile, most of Spain. But remember, that also includes Peru and Mexico and the other Spanish lands of the Caribbean, because Isabella was the one who ultimately funded Columbus's voyage. It was under the crown of Castile. But from his father's parents, he also inherited the main Central European lands. From his father's father, he inherited Austria, the main Habsburg land, but also eventually Bohemia was married into, or not married into, but was laid claim to. And then also, by conquest in a certain degree, Hungary. So he's got the lands of the King of Hungary, the King of Bohemia, and the Duke of Austria are all his, ultimately by birth. But then also, his father's mother, it brought Burgundy to the marriage. Burgundy is right here. It's always been a very independent part of France. But at this time, they also had the control of the Netherlands. Going back to the 14th century, the Netherlands are part of the patrimony of Burgundy. And that's the main point. Charles himself was born in that area. He was born in Ghent, part of the Burgundian possessions. They were even called at that time the Burgundian Netherlands. He grew up speaking Flemish, and so he had a special place in his heart for what is now the Spanish Netherlands. These areas right here, the Spanish Netherlands. He knew, for one thing, that the Netherlands don't like being told what to do. This is not a place where you flex your monarchical muscles. And that was only confirmed by the two regents he had in place during his reign as Holy Roman Emperor. You know, of course, Charles was very busy, so he mainly ruled the Netherlands through regents. First, his aunt, Margaret of Austria, who did an excellent job. She was a very charming woman and won the Netherlands over by her charm. But also his sister, Mary of Hungary, who, though somewhat beautiful, was not as good of a ruler. But both of them told Charles the same thing. When it comes to the Netherlands, leave them alone. They don't like to be told what to do. Now, unfortunately, things went well during his reign, but Charles seemed to forget to pass the message on to his son Philip. As you remember, in the year 1556, Charles abdicated. He was worn out from wars against Turks, French, and Lutherans, and eventually he just gave up. And when he gave up, he divided his lands. The Central European lands went to his brother Ferdinand, and his Spanish lands basically went to Spanish and Dutch lands went to his son Philip II. You see that right here, of course. There's a nice picture of father and son right here that I've showed you before. Let me just get this out of the way. You see right here, there he is right there. It was to Philip that the Netherlands would ultimately go. But Philip was not as kind. Remember, Philip grew up speaking Spanish, and he never learned Flemish, and so he would never have the relationship with the Netherlands that his father Charles had. Now, in a certain sense, Charles seemed to see the writing on the wall. He knew he wasn't going to win the Netherlands over, so in 1559, he left the Netherlands, never to return. This painting shows him leaving and staring down William of Orange as a kind of prediction of things to come. Here's William the Silent of Orange, whom you're going to hear about later, and Philip's leaving, but he's like, I'm going to be watching you, dog. So he leaves. Now, since he leaves, he brings in his half-sister, the bastard child of Charles V, Margaret of Parma, to rule the Netherlands in his stead. This continues the tradition of female Habsburgs ruling the Netherlands as regents, which has been working well up to now. As a matter of fact, people point to the Habsburg regents of the Netherlands as an example of women really beginning to grow in power during early modernity. But at any rate, she doesn't seem to follow the trend as well, though, as the former two regents, because she tries to impose the reforms of the Counter-Reformation, at first in a nice way, and her main reason is twofold. One is she wants to win the Calvinists back to the Catholic faith. There's a lot of Calvinists, especially in the northern 7 provinces of the Netherlands, and why that is, it's hard to say. The upper middle class always seems to like Calvinism, and the upper middle class is strong in the Netherlands. It's definitely the majority population of the Netherlands, or not the majority population, but there's a lot of upper middle class in the Netherlands. The Netherlands is the economic powerhouse of Europe at this time. And of course, there's a lot of trade. And wherever all these things are, there tend to be Calvinists. Whether that's because Calvinists create economic wealth or because they follow economic wealth, hard to say, but the point is they're there, and she wants to win them back. Now, she's aided in this endeavor by Cardinal Hugh of Granvelle, who basically is her advisor in all things religious. But there's more to it than religion. The other thing they both want to do is to bring the Netherlands under the control of Madrid, under the bureaucracy of Madrid. So they have all kinds of new bureaucratic offices and forms and documents and all kinds of other controls in the Netherlands, basically to enter them into the bureaucracy of Madrid. Spain has been the bureaucratic powerhouse ever since Ferdinand and Isabella. That's partly how they ruled, is by creating a strong bureaucracy. But the Netherlands have always been free of that because, like I said, Charles knew better than to tamper with the Netherlands. But now these two are trying to bring it more under Spanish control so that so that Spain gets a piece of the wealth that the Netherlands always seems to have. Spain is still in debt from all of its wars, and they want to basically milk that Dutch cow, as we talked about before. Now, this of course will be opposed, and it's opposed by none other than William the Silent, whom we've seen already in this picture. William the Silent opposes all these measures at the meeting of the Council of State. The Council of State was a representative body from the Netherlands, representing all the 17 provinces. He was representing Nassau, one of the provinces in Holland, and not in Holland, but in the modern-day Netherlands, and he firmly opposed these measures of Margaret of Parma and Hugh of Granvelle. So there already was some tension, but that tension only gets worse in the year 1564, because in 1564 the Inquisition was brought to the Netherlands. The Spanish Inquisition was brought to the Netherlands in order to continue this Catholic reform and this kind of trying to force convert Calvinists now. You'll notice this is a year after Trent, so it is part of the Counter-Reformation, but now it's bringing in the big guns of the Counter-Reformation a year after Trent. And this was not met with support by the Dutch, who right now are pretty attached to their freedom and to their Calvinism. The Dutch reacted violently in the year 1566. In the year 1566, they started to tear down all the images in Catholic churches, another iconoclastic presentation by the Dutch. You can still see the effects today, like in this church of Utrecht, where, just give me a second, I can show it to you here in a second, where the defaced statues still remain. Here's another representation of them burning all the Catholic images. This is the event that basically began the 80 Years' War. Basically, the iconoclasm of 1566. The war ends in 1648, so it's not exactly 80 years, but it's close enough. This is the beginning. Now, once that happens, Philip decides to send in the big guns. So here, we'll get rid of this for a second. Philip replaces Margaret of Parma, not replaces, but sends the Duke de Alva, his name is Fernando Alvarez, the Duke de Alva, to basically impose control. He comes in with 20,000 troops to impose control in the Netherlands. He's he's very violent, he kills a lot of people, and immediately sets up what's called the Council of Troubles to try Calvinists, and basically, just give me a second, I'm trying to pull up this picture, sets up the Council of Troubles to try Calvinists and basically punish them for heresy. His methods so repel Margaret of Parma that she resigns. Now, this Council of Troubles was known to the Dutch themselves as the Council of Blood, because so many people were tried and given the death sentence for just meager accusations, meager proof in travesties of justice, basically. I believe I have a picture right here. Yeah, here's basically a picture of people suffering due to the Council of Troubles right here. Thousands of them being burned at the stake. So the opposition in the war begins. The opposition is led, again, as I said, by William the Silent of Orange of Nassau, who managed to unite everybody in the Netherlands. Everybody in the Netherlands suddenly, from all walks of life, suddenly gather, and mainly their goal is to fight the Spanish. Even the sea beggars, this group of criminals who take to the high seas, are basically pirates, join in the Calvinist cause, and the Calvinist Dutch cause, to repel the Spanish. As a matter of fact, the participation of these sea beggars, who were known as criminals throughout northern Europe, repelled Elizabeth I, and she decided to withdraw her support at this point from the Dutch Wars of Religion, because she couldn't be associated at all with these sea beggars. Because, of course, we all know Elizabeth is highly above engaging with privateers. Ha ha ha, that was a joke. Now, the war continues with violence mostly perpetrated by the Spanish side, and the last straw was in 1576 with the burning of Antwerp. It's known as the Spanish Fury. 1576, the burning of Antwerp. In the event known as the Spanish Fury. This event so galvanized the opposition to the Spanish that all 17 provinces, Catholic and Protestant, united together in what is known as the Pacification of Ghent. So 1576, the Pacification of Ghent, the event where all 17 provinces decided to join forces against the Spanish. Catholic, Protestant, all of them. You get the idea. Pacification of Ghent, the uniting of all 17 provinces against the Spanish. It's represented here. If you'll notice, you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Those are the 10 Southern Catholic provinces, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Those are the 7 Calvinist provinces of the North. Now, this causes big trouble for Philip II. He's very scared, so he sends his champion, the champion that he knows he can depend on, Don John of Austria, the victor at Lepanto. He goes in to try to face all the combined forces of all the the Flemish and the Dutch of the Netherlands. But he loses in his first battle ever. Don John of Austria loses against this united Ghent, and the Spanish basically are forced to leave. The Spanish have to leave the Netherlands. They basically have lost this one. The Spanish troops, I should say, the Spanish troops are have to leave the Netherlands. Now, at this point, Philip realizes that his man for the job is just not working out. The stick is no longer working. Quite literally, you see, he has a stick right here. So he decides to replace the Duke of Alva with someone else, Alexander of Parma, Alexander Farnese of Parma. This is Margaret of Parma's son, but you might also recognize the name because it was the same name as Pope Paul III, Alessandro Farnese. And that's because Pope Paul III was his great-grandfather. So there's a family relation right there, back when the popes were pretty ill-behaved people. Now, Alexander Farnese tries a completely different tactic. He tries a policy of tolerance and conciliation for the Netherlands and trying to pull back from trying to control them. And that works well. Basically, the 10 southern provinces of the Netherlands reunite with Spain. They basically unite in their Catholicism and their basic willingness to work with Spain in a 1578 union that is known as the Union of Arras. It basically corresponds to the modern-day countries of Belgium and Luxembourg, these 10 provinces that are Catholic that unite. However, this makes Philip overplay his hand. He's so happy with the way that Alexander Farnese has been doing things that he feels bold enough to declare, well, now that things are working out in the Netherlands, I declare William the Silent an outlaw. Whoa, he's an outlaw now. He's basically, anybody can kill him if they want to. This, of course, does not go over well with the Calvinists of the Netherlands. So they also formed their own counter-union. This counter-union is formed in 1579, the very next year, 1579, the Union of Utrecht. It's the 7 northern provinces who at first are united mainly in their Calvinism and their desire to protect Calvinism, the 7 northern provinces. Now, at first that's about the extent of it, but they're also concerned about Philip. Philip is becoming more and more cocky, and one reason for that is in the year 1580, Philip also ends up inheriting the throne of Portugal. So if you think about it, his empire in this world is getting much, much bigger because technically he now has not only the red lands under his Spanish control, but since he's now king of Portugal, he has the blue lands under his control. Philip is getting a little bit power high, it seems, right here. And so they begin to take further measures. In 1581, the Dutch decide not only to be Calvinists, but they basically declare their independence from Spain. The 7 northern provinces, the 7 provinces of the north, declare their independence from Spain. This is a great opportunity for a lot of countries at this point. For example, France, shortly afterwards in 1583, France tries to take control of Antwerp instead, but as I mentioned before, that ends up backfiring. The Dutch basically shoot the soldiers of the Duke of Anjou, and that's why in that picture of the milk cow, they basically show him being pooped on his hand because they basically take their chances here to try to take control of the Dutch Republic, but they fail. Also, the very next year, there's a major upset for these 7 provinces, and that is because, just give me a second here, that's because William the Silent, who we recall as an outlaw, is assassinated. He's assassinated by a man named Balthazar Gerard. Balthazar Gerard was basically a Catholic who had been working for years, ever since he realized there was a bounty to be had by killing William the Silent. Worked for years to plan this attack and eventually succeeded in assassinating. He eventually was caught and died a terrible, terrible death, even by the standards of the time, in which his own heart was pulled out of his body and thrown into his face, among other things. But at first, this seems like it's bad news for the Dutch provinces, the northern Netherlands, but actually kind of galvanizes them, and the war continues. Now, at first in this war, there is no way to match the Spanish tercios. The Spanish tercios were the greatest kind of soldiers of this time, the greatest corps. That's going to be true until Sweden comes to the fore. And the Dutch, try as hard they might, they're not going to win as long as all the power of Spain is basically focused on them. Now, this changes, though, because of the French Wars of Religion. If you recall, there was Bernardino de Mendoza, the Spanish ambassador to France. And if you recall, he basically allied with the Guises. And in the year 1584, he created what was called the Treaty of Joinville, which basically just said that the Spanish are responsible for providing troops to the Guise family back in France. And so a lot of troops had to leave from the Netherlands, which was very close, and go to Paris to fight for the Guises. And that gave the Dutch their chance. They basically stamped on the rest of the Spanish forces in the northern Netherlands, and in the year 1593, they succeeded completely. They basically pushed the Dutch forces, pushed the Spanish out of the northern Netherlands. 3 years later, countries started to recognize that the map was changing, and France and England in particular recognized these seven provinces as their own country. They're known as either the United Provinces of the Netherlands, or more shortly, just simply the Dutch Republic, because they no longer are ruled by Spain or by any regent of Spain. They're a republic led by the representatives from the seven provinces. Of course, the other Netherlands, the Spanish Netherlands, retain their Catholic identity and their basic control under Habsburgs. And they just retain the name the Spanish Netherlands. You can see the basic division right here in this map, which is the end result. In 1609, this situation, as you can see in this map again, I can't get it down, is, just let me get rid of all these words here just a second. 1609, this is the basic situation. You have your Spanish Netherlands and your United Provinces. And that year is significant because that's basically when the Spanish stopped fighting. It's not official yet on paper. For instance, Spain does not recognize the independence of these United Provinces. But 1609 is kind of the key year because now the fighting stopped. The Spanish just realized they can't control it. That's basically the year, let me write that down, that the fighting stopped between the two provinces. In a certain sense, the end of the war, but that's going to have to actually wait until 1648, the Peace of Westphalia, when it's on paper that the Spanish recognize the independence of the United Provinces. Now, once this stalemate was reached, it was a chance for the Dutch Republic to grow in power. One thing you should just be aware of is that when it comes to economics or world power status, naval power status, the Dutch Republic is going to basically be on top during the entire 17th century. And it starts right now. Once the fighting is stopped in 1609, first, both sides tried to assess the situation and try to win souls. So you see this in this painting here in the Rijksmuseum of the two sides trying to win their souls. So here's the southern Catholic Netherlands trying to win Catholic souls, and here's the northern provinces, the United Provinces, trying to win souls. And basically, the northern Netherlands become a place where Calvinists go. And as I said before, where Calvinists go, there seems to be economic prosperity. Basically, these Dutch start to find ways to make money. That's kind of their thing. They start to find ways to reclaim land and power their own country. They take care of their own country within the ravages of war. And they start to get together and form associations of business, basically, business associations for trade, as you can see in these various paintings. The main thing they begin to do is they start to put their risk into overseas empire. They invent a new ship called the Vloot, which is going to be the next kind of dominant ship on the Atlantic and Indian waters. And doing this, starting in the 1630s, after this war, they put huge risk in starting to build an overseas empire. You can see it right here. They basically start to spread all over. Their first voyage in the 1630s brought back tons of spices from India that they sold for 400% profit. And eventually, they become, again, as I said, the 17th century powerhouse of trade in the world. You can see their basic colonies that they eventually form here. The dark green is the Dutch West India Company. where you see New York and other places that you know from your American history class. The light green is the Dutch East Indies Company, where they also established various powerhouses. And the orange is just the ones that don't really colonize, but other places where they do trade. Um, this brings a period of unparalleled fluid capital to Northern Europe, as you saw in the video with Lord Clark. And the Dutch start to become known as a place to basically speculate and make money. The upper middle class is very prosperous there. They start to build very nice houses. The houses of Amsterdam are a symbol of the 17th century patricians of this time who are just making a lot of money. That's why people go to Amsterdam, to see these nice Dutch houses. It's, of course, most famously portrayed in the famous tulip mania that you've all heard about in the video, where between the year 1634 and 1637, people just speculated on tulips. They became this commodity that everybody wanted, and the price rose very quickly to the point where they were basically worth a house or 3 times an average annual salary, and then suddenly dropped because the demand just suddenly dropped. But you see kind of the folly of it all. This is, of course, a symbol for folly, but it's also a symbol for free market capitalism and how it works. The laws of supply and demand, and sometimes things not following their intrinsic value, etc. You see it right here in this famous picture where the Dutch are abandoning their looms, the normal symbols of their trade in textiles, which is where they got their start, and they're all following it to get on this car, this wagon of fools that is just going after tulips. Here's another picture of a really nice tulip right here. I don't remember what this picture is. Oh, I did that twice. Okay. Now, of course, this prosperity is shown well in this particular picture right here. It's actually a picture of them celebrating their freedom in the Peace of Westphalia, but it's even an appropriate picture. It shows kind of their joy in life, their joy in freedom that brought them economic prosperity, would make them basically the kings of economics in the 17th century. You should always be aware of that. It's one of the reasons this war was fought, and it's one of the symbols of the Dutch. Freedom brings economic prosperity. They're always been seen as a symbol of that, so you should just be aware of that aspect of the Dutch.